key turned in the lock with a quiet, familiar click. Julian Croft stepped into the cool, silent foyer of the home he shared with his wife Clara. It was 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. The sun, bright and indifferent, streamed through the large gallery window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He had come home to surprise Clara, to take her to an early lunch at the little French bistro she loved, a place they hadn't visited in months. In his hand he held a single, perfect gardenia, her favorite flower. Its scent a delicate counterpoint to the sterile quiet of the house. He set his briefcase down, the soft thud of leather on polished oak the only sound. He walked toward the living room, a smile forming on his lips. And then he saw it. Draped over the back of his favorite reading chair, a handsome worn leather wingback that had been his father's, was a jacket. It was not his jacket. His were classic, tailored pieces in navy, charcoal, or tweed. This was a modern, razor-sharp blazer of expensive Italian wool, a shade of slate gray so dark it was almost black. It screamed money, but a different kind of money than his own. It was new money, loud, arrogant, and utterly self-assured. A tremor, cold and unwelcome, went through him. He thought Clara was cheating. He thought his world, which had felt so carefully constructed, was about to shatter. He didn't know that the truth was both far less and infinitely more devastating. He didn't know this jacket was not a sign of infidelity, but a declaration of war. Within 3 months, the man who owned this jacket and the family he belonged to would learn the monumental cost of underestimating a quiet man. They had started a fire, believing he was nothing but kindling. They were about to discover he was the storm that would put it out. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for this story. I see so many of you here already. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy stories about the underdog getting their moment, about patience finally paying off, make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. All right, let's get back to it. Let's see what happens when Julian confronts the owner of that jacket. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of his own making. He forced himself to breathe. In, out. His mind, usually a calm and ordered place of blueprints and structural calculations, was a chaotic whirlwind of betrayal and pain. He walked slowly toward the chair. The jacket was carelessly thrown, one arm dangling toward the floor as if its owner had been in a great hurry. He could smell a faint, cloying scent of expensive cologne clinging to the fabric. It was the same cologne Clara's brother Leo wore. Relief warred with a new kind of dread. It wasn't a stranger, a lover, it was family, which in many ways was worse. "Clara?" he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. The sound of voices came from the formal dining room, hushed but sharp with tension. He recognized them instantly. Marcus Caldwell, his father-in-law, the patriarch of a real estate empire built on aggressive takeovers and ruthless negotiation. And Leo Caldwell, his brother-in-law, a man who wore his inherited wealth like a suit of armor, convinced it made him invincible. Julian moved toward the sound, the gardenia still clutched in his hand, its petals now feeling fragile and foolish. He stopped in the doorway, an unseen observer. The scene before him was a tableau of power and pressure. Marcus stood at the head of the massive mahogany table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his hand resting on the polished surface as if claiming dominion over the very house. Leo was pacing, his movements agitated, a predator confined. And in the middle of it all was Clara. She sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She looked small, diminished, a pale imitation of the vibrant woman he had married. "He is holding you back, Clara," Marcus was saying, his voice a low, commanding rumble. It was the voice he used to dismantle business rivals, a tool of casual destruction. "This architect, this dreamer, he builds little art galleries and community centers. It's quaint. It's also pathetic. A Caldwell woman should not be married to a man who considers a renovation his crowning achievement. Leo scoffed, stopping his pacing to lean toward his sister. He's a charity case, Clara. We all know it. You're propping him up. How does it look, for God's sake? You, living in this house your mother left you, while he plays with his little drafting pencils and pretends to have a career. It's embarrassing. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He had designed this house. He had spent 2 years of his life, before he and Clara were even married, restoring it from a state of near ruin. It had been his gift to her, a transformation of her mother's decaying legacy into a beautiful, light-filled home. They called it her mother's house, but its bones, its light, its very soul, that was his work. They were insulting him inside the very monument to his love for their daughter. Clara finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "He's a good man, Daddy." "Good doesn't pay the bills," Marcus shot back, his tone dismissive. "Good doesn't maintain a certain standard. Look at us, Clara. Look at the world we move in. And then look at him. He doesn't fit. He never will. We are offering you a way out. We are offering him a way out. A clean break. He'll be well compensated for his time." It was then that Julian stepped into the room. 3 sets of eyes swiveled to him. Marcus's expression didn't change. It remained one of cold, appraising authority. Leo smirked, a cruel, triumphant twist of his lips. It was Clara's face that broke him. She looked at him with a devastating mixture of guilt, shame, and a desperate, silent plea for him to understand. In that moment, he saw her not as a co-conspirator, but as a hostage. A willing one, perhaps, but a hostage nonetheless. She was the silent enabler, the one who loved him but loved the comfort of her family's approval more. "Julian," she breathed, her voice cracking. He ignored her, his eyes locking with Marcus's. He held up the gardenia. "I came home to take my wife to lunch," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I see she's already dining with vultures." The insult, delivered without heat, landed with surgical precision. Leo's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of fury. "You watch your mouth," he snarled. Marcus held up a hand, silencing his son. He gave Julian a look that was almost pitying, the way one might look at an insect before crushing it. "Julian, good. You've saved us the trouble of tracking you down at your studio." The slight pause before the word studio dripped with condescension. "We're here to discuss the end of your marriage." Julian walked further into the room, placing the gardenia gently in the center of the vast, empty table. It looked small and vulnerable, a spot of pure white in a sea of dark, polished wood. He pulled out a chair, the one directly opposite Marcus, and sat down. He did not look at Clara. He couldn't. To look at her would be to let the hurt show, and he would not give them that satisfaction. "My marriage," Julian stated, not as a question, but as a correction, "is not a business to be liquidated, Marcus, though I imagine that's the only way you can see it." "Everything is a business," Marcus replied smoothly, taking his seat as if he were a king holding court. "And this one is a failed venture. The investment has yielded no returns. It's time to cut our losses." He slid a pristine white envelope across the table. It stopped a few inches from Julian's hand. "That is a cashier's check for $250,000. A severance package. You sign the divorce papers, which my lawyer will have ready by the end of the day, and you walk away. Quietly." Julian looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. In his pocket, his fingers found the cool, smooth metal of a small, unassuming object on his keychain. It was a simple USB drive, no bigger than his thumb. It looked like a cheap promotional item, worthless. Inside it, however, was a world they couldn't possibly imagine. Inside it was their ruin. He pressed his thumb against its surface, the contact a small, secret source of strength. $250,000, Julian said, a note of detached curiosity in his voice. "Is that what my wife's happiness is worth to you? Or is that what my silence is worth? It's a generous offer, Leo chimed in, leaning back in his chair with a renewed sense of arrogance. More than you'd make in 5 years designing patios for dentists. Take it, it's the best deal you're ever going to get. Julian finally turned his head, his gaze falling upon Clara. She was staring at her hands, refusing to meet his eyes. The secondary conflict, the one that hurt more than any of Marcus's barbs, was blooming in the silence between them. He had been a fool. He had thought their love was a fortress. He was just now realizing it was a house of cards, and her family was the wind. Clara, he said, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. Do you have anything to say? She looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. Julian, please, just listen to them. They're trying to help. And there it was, the betrayal. Not an affair, but an abdication. She had surrendered him to them. The frustration, the righteous indignation, it began to coalesce in his chest, not into hot anger, but into a cold, hard resolve. They thought this was an ending. They had no idea it was a beginning. Help, Julian repeated, the word tasting like ash. He looked back at Marcus, a strange, calm smile touching his lips. It was a smile that did not reach his eyes. You have no idea what you've just done. The memory of their first meeting was as vivid as the polished shine on the mahogany table before him. It had been at a charity gala for the city's art museum. Julian had just won a minor but prestigious award for his pro bono design of a small, innovative community library in a low-income neighborhood. He hadn't wanted to go, feeling out of place among the city's titans of finance and industry, but his mentor had insisted. He had been standing near a display of architectural models, lost in his own world, when a voice like wind chimes cut through the din. You're the architect, aren't you? The one who designed the Elmwood Library? He turned to see Clara. She was radiant, wearing a simple black dress that somehow outshone all the glittering jewels and ostentatious gowns around her. Her interest was genuine, her questions intelligent. She saw the passion in his work, the philosophy behind the lines. She didn't ask what it cost, she asked what it meant. For the first time in a long time, Julian felt seen. They talked for hours, oblivious to the party swirling around them. He learned she was a Caldwell, a name that meant something in this city, but she wore it lightly, almost apologetically. She spoke of feeling trapped by her family's expectations, of wanting something more real than the endless cycle of galas and acquisitions. He had fallen in love not with a Caldwell, but with the woman who wanted to escape being one. Their courtship was a whirlwind of stolen moments, walks in the park, late-night diners, visits to dusty bookstores. He showed her his world, a world of texture, light, and human-scale beauty. She in turn gave him a glimpse into hers, a gilded cage of immense pressure and casual cruelty. He met her family for the first time over dinner at the Caldwell estate, a sprawling, soulless mansion that felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home. Marcus had sized him up with the predatory stillness of a shark, his questions about Julian's prospects feeling less like conversation and more like a financial audit. Leo had been openly derisive, making snide remarks about Julian's second-hand car and his choice to work on public projects instead of lucrative commercial ones. So you're a man of the people, Leo had sneered. How noble, and how poor. Clara had defended him then, her cheeks flushed with anger. Leo, stop it. Julian is a brilliant architect. His work matters. But even then, Julian had noticed the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes flickered toward her father, seeking an approval that never came. She was fighting, but she was fighting on their territory, by their rules. It was a battle she could never win. They married a year later, in a small ceremony at the courthouse, against her family's wishes. They moved into her mother's dilapidated house, and Julian poured his heart into its restoration. For a time it was their sanctuary. The Caldwells kept their distance, their disapproval a low, constant hum in the background of their lives. But as Marcus's empire grew, so did his desire for absolute control over his legacy, a legacy that included his daughter. The pressure began to mount. Invitations to family events became summonses. Every dinner was an ordeal, an exercise in humiliation. Just 6 months ago, they had all attended a dinner at the Caldwell estate. Marcus had invited Philip Vance, a rival architect known for his flashy, extravagant, and soulless glass towers. The entire evening was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to belittle Julian. "Philip is a true visionary," Marcus had boomed, clapping Vance on the shoulder. "He understands that architecture is about power. It's a statement. His new tower for Sterling Thorn is going to redefine the city's skyline." "We're also the frontrunners for the Phoenix project," Vance said, preening under the praise. "The big eco tower. It's the most ambitious project the city has seen in 50 years. The lead designer is some anonymous prodigy, goes by the pseudonym Aethelred. They say his concept is revolutionary, but my firm has the resources to execute it. We're confident we'll be the ones to build it." Julian had sat silently, swirling the wine in his glass. He felt Clara's hand find his under the table, a small, nervous gesture of support. He gave her fingers a reassuring squeeze, but his mind was elsewhere. Aethelred. He had chosen the name himself, a nod to an Old English king known for being underestimated. The Phoenix Project was his. For over a year, he had been leading a secret team, working from a discreet, state-of-the-art office he leased under a shell corporation. It was the commission of a lifetime, a project that would not just redefine the skyline, but would set a new global standard for sustainable architecture. The client was a new, powerful, and intensely private international development firm, Elysian Properties. They valued secrecy and pure merit above all else. They had chosen him, his vision, over dozens of celebrity architects like Philip Vance. "Aethelred," Leo mused, a forkful of food halfway to his mouth. "Sounds dramatic, probably some kid in his 20s trying to be edgy. Still, if the design is as good as they say, Caldwell Construction should be the one building it. Our name on a project like that would be a major coup." "We're working on it," Marcus said, his eyes glinting. "We have our feelers out. We'll find a way to get in front of the decision-makers at Elysian." He then turned his gaze to Julian, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Julian, you're in the industry. What do you hear about this Aethelred fellow on the playground?" The table fell silent. The insult was clear. The playground, where children like him belonged. Julian took a slow sip of wine. He met his father-in-law's gaze without flinching. "I hear," he said, his voice level and clear, "that Aethelred values substance over style, and that he has no patience for arrogance." He felt a familiar pressure in his pocket, the outline of the USB drive against his leg. It contained the complete schematics for the Phoenix project, every brilliant, world-changing detail. It also contained the recently finalized legal documents that were the true source of his power, a secret he had guarded more closely than the designs themselves. The moment passed. Marcus grunted, dismissing the comment, and turned the conversation back to Philip Vance's latest gaudy creation. But Julian had seen the flash of irritation in his eyes. He had spoken a truth the man could not refute, and Marcus Caldwell did not like truths he could not control. Clara had squeezed his hand again, a silent thank you for not causing a scene, for enduring. But Julian wasn't just enduring. He was calculating. He was waiting. Every insult, every slight was a brick, and he was patiently, methodically building a wall they would never be able to climb. The dinner party was just one more brick in that wall. Today's ambush in his own home was the capstone. Back in the present, in the cold formality of his dining room, Julian finally let his gaze drift from Clara's tear-streaked face to the envelope on the table. $250,000. It was a laughable sum. The initial consulting fee he had received from Elysian Properties, deposited into a bank account the Caldwells knew nothing about, was 10 times that amount. His inheritance, the news of which he had received only a month prior and had since legally solidified, was a controlling interest in Elysian Properties itself, bequeathed to him by a reclusive, eccentric uncle who had seen the same spark in him that Clara once had. His uncle had built a silent empire, and having no children of his own, had left it to the one person he believed had the integrity not to squander it. Julian looked at Marcus, then at Leo. He saw their smug, confident faces, so certain of their victory. They were celebrating a checkmate when they didn't even understand the game they were playing. He pushed the chair back, the legs scraping softly against the hardwood floor. He stood up, leaving the envelope untouched. He walked over to the reading chair and picked up Leo's jacket. He held it out. "You forgot your armor, Leo," he said softly. "You should take it. You're going to need it." He let it drop to the floor. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the three of them in a stunned, confused silence. The perfect white gardenia sitting on the table between them, like a forgotten truce flag from a war that had only just begun. The days that followed the confrontation were a study in strained silence. Julian moved into the guest room of his own house, creating a physical boundary that mirrored the emotional chasm that had opened between him and Clara. They were two ships passing in the night, their conversations limited to brief, painful pleasantries about household necessities. He could feel her desperation, her desire to explain, to apologize, to rewind time. But he offered her no opening. For an apology to be meaningful, she first had to understand the full scope of her betrayal, and she was not there yet. She was still mourning the loss of her comfortable peace, not the loss of her integrity. Meanwhile, Julian's other life, his real life, accelerated. His public-facing work continued from his modest, unassuming office in a converted warehouse downtown. The hobby shop, as Marcus had once called it. It was a small, two-room affair with a drafting table, a few computers, and walls covered in sketches for the community projects he genuinely loved. It was the perfect camouflage. No one would ever suspect that the man working here was the same person who, 3 times a week, took a service elevator to a secret, unmarked suite on the top floor of the city's most exclusive office building. This was the lair of Ethelred. It was a space of clean lines, brushed steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows with a panoramic view of the city he was about to reshape. Here he managed a small, elite team of engineers, environmental scientists, and fellow architects, all hand-picked for their brilliance and bound by ironclad, non-disclosure agreements. This was where the Phoenix Project came to life. The walls were interactive screens displaying complex energy models, wind flow simulations, and renderings of the tower's revolutionary, breathing facade. One afternoon, about a week after the incident with the jacket, Julian was in this secret office, deep in a video conference with the board of Elysian Properties. His board, though they only knew him as Ethelred, the genius designer they had hired. He was still maintaining the separation, allowing them to see him purely as a creative force before he revealed his true position as their new leader. "The preliminary engineering reports are exceeding all expectations, Ethelred," said a woman named Evelyn Reed, the interim CEO, and a sharp, no-nonsense executive Julian already respected. "The self-shading skin and the geothermal exchange system are performing at 15% above our most optimistic projections. This isn't just a green building, it's a living organism." "That was the intent, Evelyn," Julian said, his voice altered by a subtle modulator to protect his identity. "The goal is a structure that doesn't just minimize its impact, but actively contributes to the health of its environment." The meeting continued, a high-level discussion of material sourcing, budget allocations, and timelines. It was a world away from the petty humiliations of the Caldwells. Here, he was not a dreamer or a charity case. He was a visionary, a leader. The contrast was a constant, sobering reminder of what he was fighting for. Not just revenge, but the right to be seen for who he truly was. As the meeting wrapped up, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from a number he didn't recognize. The message was short. "This is Marcus Caldwell. I need to see you. Your office. 1 hour." A cold smile touched Julian's lips. The next act of the drama was about to begin. He dismissed his team, packed his briefcase with a few decoy blueprints of a small park pavilion, and drove to his other office, the hobby shop. He arrived with 10 minutes to spare, using the time to brew a pot of coffee, the aroma filling the small space with a sense of normalcy that was entirely false. Marcus arrived precisely on time. He entered the office without knocking, his presence seeming to suck all the air out of the room. He looked around, his lip curling in a faint sneer of distaste. He took in the old drafting table, the rolls of paper, the worn-out sofa in the corner. "Charming," he said, the word a poison dart. "It's even more humble than I imagined." "It serves its purpose," Julian replied calmly, gesturing to a chair. "Coffee?" "No." Marcus remained standing, asserting his dominance. "I'm not here for pleasantries, Julian. I'm here because you've made things difficult. Clara is a mess. You're skulking around your own house like a ghost. This ridiculous standoff needs to end." "I agree," Julian said. Marcus seemed taken aback by the easy agreement. "Good. Then you've had time to think about my offer. To be reasonable." "Oh, I've thought about it a great deal," Julian said, leaning back against his desk. He picked up a thick, heavy roll of drafting paper, its weight familiar in his hands. "I've thought about the $250,000. I've thought about your concern for your daughter, and I've thought about your assessment of my career." "It's not an assessment, it's a fact," Marcus said impatiently. "You're a small man playing a small game. I am offering you a dignified exit, an opportunity to leave the city and start over, with enough capital to build something more substantial than this." He waved a dismissive hand at the office. Julian looked at the man who was the source of so much of his wife's pain, of his own quiet frustration. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was standing in the equivalent of Clark Kent's broom closet, lecturing Superman on the importance of flying. The dramatic irony was so thick Julian could almost taste it. "Let me ask you a question, Marcus," Julian said, his tones shifting from placid to probing. "You're a man who prides himself on knowing the market, on seeing value where others don't. What do you know about Elysian Properties?" The name hung in the air between them. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "They're the new player in town. Big money, very private. They're backing the Phoenix project. Why? And Caldwell Construction wants the building contract for that project, correct?" Julian continued, pressing his advantage. "I hear it would be the biggest contract in your company's history, a legacy project. Our bid is aggressive. Our reputation is unparalleled. We are the logical choice," Marcus stated, his voice full of its usual blustering confidence. But a flicker of uncertainty had entered his eyes. He didn't know where this was going. "But you can't get a meeting," Julian said, his voice dropping. "You've tried every channel. You've tried to leverage your political connections. You've tried to find out who is on their board, but they're a ghost. And the lead designer, this Ethelred, he's even more of a mystery. You have no way in. Your reputation means nothing to them. Your power, for the first time in a long time, is irrelevant." Each statement was a carefully placed stone, building a path to a conclusion Marcus could not yet see. "What's your point, Julian?" Marcus snapped, his patience wearing thin. Julian smiled, a genuine, cold smile this time. "My point, Marcus, is that you come into my office, a space dedicated to the work you so openly despise, and you lecture me on being small. You, who are so desperate to get into a room that I, in fact, own. You are so blinded by your own perceived greatness that you have no idea who you're talking to." He unrolled the blueprint in his hands. It wasn't a park pavilion. It was a detailed elevation of the Phoenix project's lower levels, complete with notes and calculations in his own distinct handwriting. At the bottom, in the title block, were two names: Designer, Ethelred. Project lead, Julian Croft. Marcus stared at it. His face, for the first time since Julian had known him, went completely blank. The cogs were turning, but the pieces were so outlandish, so impossible, that they refused to fit. He looked from the blueprint to Julian's face, searching for the joke, the trick. He found none. That's impossible, he stammered, the first crack in the monolithic facade. Is it? Julian asked quietly. He rolled the blueprint back up. I think you should leave now, Marcus. We have nothing more to discuss. But know this, the next time we speak, it will be on my terms, in a place of my choosing. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suddenly very small room. And you will address me with the respect I have earned, not the contempt you feel I deserve. He pointed to the door. For a long, silent moment, Marcus Caldwell, the titan of industry, just stood there, his world tilting on its axis. He looked smaller. The power had subtly, almost invisibly, begun to shift. Finally, without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open behind him, a silent admission of his own confusion and defeat. Julian stood alone in his hobby shop, the quiet hum of his real life waiting for him, miles away and floors above. The storm was gathering. The weeks leading up to the final confrontation were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian operated with the serene patience of a chess master setting up a board for a guaranteed checkmate. He knew Marcus was scrambling, using his vast resources to verify the impossible claim Julian had made. He would be digging into public records, hiring private investigators, trying to connect the dots between Julian Croft, the humble architect, and Ethelred, the mythical designer. He would fail. Julian had built his cover with the same meticulous care he used to design his buildings. His uncle's lawyers had structured the inheritance through a series of trusts and holding companies so complex it would take months to unravel, and by then it would be too late. At home, the atmosphere grew heavier. Clara, sensing a shift she couldn't comprehend, became more desperate. She left notes for him. She cooked his favorite meals and left them for him, uneaten. She tried to catch him in the hallway, her eyes pleading. "Julian, can we please just talk?" she asked one evening, blocking his path to the guest room. "I know I messed up. I was scared. They're my family." "They are," he agreed, his voice gentle but firm. "And you chose them. You listened to their assessment of me, and you did not defend your husband. You did not defend our marriage. You asked me to listen to them. What is there to talk about, Clara? You showed me your truth. Now you must let me act on mine." He moved past her, the scent of her perfume a painful reminder of happier times. He felt a pang of pity for her. She was a product of her environment, a woman raised to believe that love was transactional and security was paramount. But pity was not a foundation for a marriage. Respect was, and she had failed that fundamental test. The catalyst for the final act came not from Marcus or Leo, but from an unexpected corner. Clara's younger sister, Amelia. She had always been the quiet one, the observer, often overshadowed by Leo's arrogance and Clara's social grace. She had been present at many of the humiliating family dinners, her discomfort always visible to Julian, if to no one else. One Tuesday night, exactly 3 months after the incident with the jacket, Julian's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Julian, it's Amelia. I don't know if this is right, but I can't stay silent. Marcus and Leo are planning something. It's about the Elysian bid. They think they've found a way to discredit Ethelred and force Elysian's hand. They're presenting their findings at a meeting tomorrow morning at Caldwell Tower. They've somehow gotten the Elysian board to attend. I think they're going to try to ruin you, or at least the person they think is your boss. Be careful." Julian stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across his face. The unexpected ally. Amelia's conscience had finally outweighed her fear, and she had, unwittingly, handed him the perfect stage for his final performance. They had called a meeting with his board to discredit him. They were walking into their own execution, carrying the axe themselves. He typed back a simple reply. "Thank you, Amelia. Your integrity is a rare thing." The next morning, Julian woke before dawn. He showered and dressed with deliberate care. He chose a suit of impeccable tailoring, a dark charcoal wool that was understated but undeniably expensive. It was a suit that spoke of quiet confidence, of earned authority. He bypassed the guest room and walked into the master bedroom. Clara was asleep, her face etched with worry even in her dreams. On his side of the closet, tucked away in the very back, was a briefcase he hadn't used in years. It was a gift from his uncle, made of rich, dark cordovan leather with solid brass fittings. It was the briefcase of a chairman. He placed the small, unassuming USB drive inside it. Then he added a single, slim file folder. He clicked the locks shut, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. He took one last look at his sleeping wife, a wave of sadness washing over him for what they had lost. Then he turned and walked away. The city was waking up as he drove toward the gleaming steel and glass spire of Caldwell Tower. The sky was a pale, bruised purple, the promise of a new day. For him, it was the promise of a reckoning. He felt no anger, no thirst for vengeance, only a profound sense of clarity. He was an architect, and his medium was structure. The Caldwell family's power was a poorly constructed building, built on a foundation of arrogance and fear. Today, he would perform a controlled demolition. He parked not in the guest garage, but in the private underground level reserved for the building's executives, using a key card the Caldwells had no idea he possessed. He rode a private elevator, not to the main lobby, but directly to the top floor, where the main boardroom was located. He stepped out into a hushed, opulent reception area. A nervous-looking executive assistant rushed forward. "Sir, can I help you? This floor is reserved for the Elysian meeting." "I'm here for the meeting," Julian said calmly. "I'm sorry, I don't have your name on the list." Before Julian could reply, the boardroom doors opened and Leo Caldwell strode out. He was beaming, his face flushed with impending victory. He was holding a stack of documents ready to present his case. When he saw Julian, his expression shifted to one of pure, triumphant malice. "Well, well, well," Leo sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look what the cat dragged in. Come to watch the big boys play, Julian? I'm surprised you could find our building." Julian simply smiled. "I had a feeling I was needed here today, Leo." "Needed?" Leo laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "The only thing you're needed for is to sign your divorce papers. But I'm glad you're here. You'll have a front row seat to watch your mysterious genius boss, Aethelred, get exposed for the fraud he is. We've found some irregularities in his credentials. It seems your hero isn't who he says he is. And once we've dealt with him, Caldwell Construction will step in to save the Phoenix Project. It's a beautiful day." Julian's smile didn't waver. "It certainly is, Leo. A day for beautiful things." From inside the boardroom, Marcus Caldwell's voice boomed. "Leo, are they here? Let's get this started." "The board is all here," Leo said to Julian in a conspiratorial whisper, his arrogance making him reckless. "All online from Zurich, London, Hong Kong. They're about to get the shock of their lives." He clapped Julian on the shoulder, a gesture of profound condescension. "Go on, find a seat in the back. Try not to make any noise." Leo turned and swaggered back into the boardroom. Julian followed him in. The room was magnificent, a testament to Caldwell power. A long, gleaming table dominated the space, surrounded by 20 chairs. At the far end, a massive screen showed the faces of the Elysian Properties board members, including Evelyn Reed. Her expression was neutral, but Julian could detect a hint of skepticism in her eyes. Marcus stood at the head of the table, a conquering general about to survey the battlefield. Several Caldwell executives were seated along one side. The other side was conspicuously empty. Marcus saw Julian, and his eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in fury. He was about to order him out when Leo leaned in and whispered, "Let him stay. Let him watch." Marcus considered this for a second, then gave a slight, cruel nod. The humiliation would be all the more complete. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Marcus began, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "Thank you for joining us. I know the circumstances are unusual. We have called this meeting because we have uncovered some deeply disturbing information regarding the individual you know as Aethelred, the lead architect of the Phoenix Project." Julian walked slowly along the empty side of the table. Every eye was on him, the board members on the screen looking confused, Marcus and Leo looking at him with contemptuous amusement. He didn't take a seat in the back as instructed. Instead, he walked all the way to the head of the table, to the empty chairman's seat directly opposite Marcus. He placed his cordovan leather briefcase on the table with a solid, authoritative thud. The sound cut through Marcus's speech. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus snarled, his composure finally cracking. "That seat is not for you." Julian looked at Marcus. He looked at Leo. He looked at the confused faces on the screen. Then he addressed Evelyn Reed directly. "Evelyn," he said, his voice calm, clear, and unmodulated. "My apologies for the theatrics. There were some local matters that required a personal touch." On the screen, Evelyn Reed's eyes widened in recognition. A slow smile spread across her face. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice warm with understanding, "it is a pleasure to finally see you. The board has been eagerly awaiting your formal introduction." The name, Mr. Croft, landed in the opulent boardroom like a bomb. Marcus and Leo froze. The blood drained from their faces. They looked from the screen to Julian and back to the screen, their minds refusing to process the information. Julian clicked open his briefcase. He took out the USB drive. "Before we address the irregularities Mr. Caldwell wishes to discuss," he said, his gaze sweeping over the stunned Caldwell team, "I believe I have a presentation of my own." He walked to the head of the table where the presentation equipment was set up. He calmly unplugged the laptop Leo had prepared and inserted his own USB drive. He turned to face the room, a quiet commander taking control of his ship. "Let's begin," he said. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, a vacuum where sound and comprehension had ceased to exist. Marcus and Leo Caldwell stood frozen, their faces masks of disbelief. The board members on the screen watched with rapt attention, the pieces of a puzzle they had only partially understood now clicking rapidly into place. Julian's first slide appeared on the massive screen. It was elegantly simple. White text on a black background. Elysian Properties Board of Directors meeting. Introducing the new chairman and majority shareholder. A beat of silence. Julian clicked the remote. The next slide showed a photograph of a man in his late 60s with kind, intelligent eyes. Beneath it, his name, Edward Croft, 1950 to 2023. Below that, a single line of text, founder and sole proprietor of the Elysian Properties Trust. "My uncle," Julian said, his voice filling the cavernous room. "He believed that true wealth wasn't something you displayed, but something you used. He built his company in silence, acquiring assets, funding projects he believed in, all while living a simple life. He despised arrogance and ostentation. He called it the disease of the insecure." He looked directly at Marcus, whose face had gone from pale to a ghastly shade of gray. "When he passed away a few months ago," Julian continued, "he left his entire estate, including his controlling interest in Elysian Properties, to me. His only condition was that I was to tell no one until I felt the time was right. He wanted me to see who people truly were when they thought I had nothing." Another click. The next slide was a complex legal document, a deed of trust, with Julian's name, Julian M. Croft, clearly visible, highlighted in yellow. The date of transfer was a month ago. The room felt several degrees colder. Leo sank into a chair, his mouth hanging slightly open. Now, Julian said, his tone becoming crisper, more businesslike, let's move on to the Phoenix Project. Another click. A new slide appeared, showing the breathtaking initial rendering of the Eco Tower, its slender form reaching for the sky. The Phoenix Project. Lead designer, Ethelred. A project my uncle and I had been developing for 2 years before his death, Julian explained. He funded the initial research personally. He wanted to leave behind a legacy that wasn't just about profit, but about progress. He helped me choose the pseudonym. He thought it was amusing. Julian paused, letting the information saturate the room. He turned his gaze to Leo. You were about to present some irregularities regarding Ethelred's credentials, Leo. Please, proceed. I'm fascinated to hear what you found. Leo looked like he had been struck by lightning. He stared at his now useless stack of papers, a pathetic collection of fabricated rumors and innuendo designed to smear a ghost. He had been preparing to assassinate a man's character, only to find that man standing before him, holding the gun. We, Leo stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Allow me, Julian said, his voice devoid of pity. He clicked the remote again. The final slide appeared. It was the most devastating of all. It was a simple side-by-side comparison. On the left was a smiling professional headshot of Julian. On the right, the stylized, anonymous logo for Ethelred. Between them, a single, bold, equals sign. Julian Croft equals Ethelred. The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. Julian turned away from the screen to face the two men who had made his life a quiet hell for the past 3 years. For years, he began, his voice low and steady, a quiet storm of righteous anger. I have sat at your table. I have endured your insults. I have listened to you mock my work, question my worth, and belittle my ambition. You called my office a hobby shop. You called me a charity case. You dismissed my life's passion as the work of a dreamer playing on a playground. He took a step toward Marcus. You stood in my home, a home I rebuilt with my own 2 hands, and you tried to buy my silence. You tried to liquidate my marriage like a failing asset. You offered me $250,000 to disappear. He let out a short, humorless laugh. My initial design fee for this project, the project your company is so desperate to be a part of, was more than that. The value of the shares I inherited, he gestured to the screen, could buy and sell Caldwell Construction 10 times over, and I would not notice the expense. He had their full, undivided attention. This was the moral mirror, and their reflections were hideous. You believe in power, Marcus, Julian said, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, which made it all the more terrifying. You respect wealth, you admire dominance, but you are blind to true worth. You look at a man and you see only his suit, his car, his title. You never once thought to look at the man himself, at his work, at his integrity, at his patience. He turned to Leo. And you wear your father's success like it's a personal achievement. You are the echo of a powerful man with all of the arrogance and none of the substance. You called me a fraud. You came here today to ruin a man you didn't know, to secure a prize you hadn't earned. Julian walked back to the head of the table. He looked at the faces of his board on the screen, then back at the wreckage of the Caldwells. The central tenet of the Elysian Properties Charter, as written by my uncle, is partnership with integrity. We do not do business with bullies. We do not reward arrogance, and we do not suffer fools. He looked at Evelyn Reed. Evelyn, please note for the record that the Board of Elysian Properties formally rejects the bid from Caldwell Construction for the Phoenix Project. Furthermore, due to their unethical business practices and attempts to slander our lead designer, they are to be permanently blacklisted from any future Elysian-funded projects globally. On the screen, Evelyn nodded grimly. So noted, Mr. Chairman. The finality of it was absolute. It wasn't just the loss of a contract. It was a corporate death sentence. Their reputation, the only currency Marcus truly valued, was now worthless with the biggest new player in the market. "Now," Julian said, his gaze falling once more on Marcus and Leo, "if you'll excuse us, we have a project to build. You may see yourselves out." He gestured to the door, a perfect, symmetrical echo of Marcus's gesture in his own office weeks before. The parallel structure was complete. The reversal of fortune was total. Those who had humiliated now stood broken. The man they had diminished now held all the power, and he had taken it without raising his voice, without a single threat. He had simply told them the truth. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of collapse. Leo, his face purple with rage, finally found his voice. "You can't do this," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "We'll sue you. We'll sue you for everything you have." Julian looked at him with an expression of profound weariness. "Sue me for what, Leo? For choosing not to award a contract to your company? For revealing my own identity? Your father is a lawyer's nightmare. I'm sure he can explain the concept of frivolous litigation to you. You have no case. You have nothing. You flew too close to the sun, and you've just discovered it was my son." Marcus, on the other hand, seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of minutes. The blustering titan was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out old man. He stumbled forward, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. It was the posture of a beggar, and the transformation was grotesque. "Julian, son, please," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "There's been a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. I was looking out for my daughter. I was testing you, to see if you had the strength." The pathetic attempt to reframe his cruelty as a test was the most offensive thing he had said yet. "Testing me?" Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through the lie like glass. "You weren't testing me, Marcus. You were trying to break me. Don't insult my intelligence now by pretending your malice was a strategy. You did what you did because you are a bully. It is the only way you know how to interact with people you perceive as beneath you. Your fatal flaw was in your perception." The other Caldwell executives who had been sitting in stunned silence began to quietly gather their things, their faces averted. They were rats deserting a sinking ship, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. On the screen, Evelyn Reed cleared her throat. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice a model of professional decorum, "if the local matter is concluded, the board has several agenda items to discuss regarding the next phase of the project." "Of course, Evelyn," Julian replied, turning his back on the Caldwells as if they had already ceased to exist. "Let's proceed." This was the ultimate dismissal. He didn't need to watch them leave. He didn't need to gloat. He simply moved on, rendering them irrelevant. Their part in his story was over. The sounds of a commotion, Leo shouting, Marcus pleading, security being called, faded into the background as Julian began to discuss material logistics with his London team. He was calm. He was focused. He was in his element. But as he spoke, his mind drifted to Clara. He had dismantled her father and brother. He had destroyed the foundations of the world she had been raised in. He had done it not just for himself, but for her too, to free her from their toxic influence. But he knew it would not feel like a liberation to her. It would feel like an attack. He left the Caldwell Tower an hour later. He took the private elevator down and walked through the hushed garage to his car. As he drove out into the bright afternoon sun, his phone began to ring. It was Clara. He looked at the screen, at her picture, and felt a deep, aching sadness. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again. He silenced it. A string of frantic text messages followed. "Julian, Dad just called me. He was hysterical. What did you do? Leo is saying you ruined them. Is this true? Please, Julian, talk to me. I'm scared. I'm coming home. We have to talk." He drove not home, but to the waterfront, parking by a small park that overlooked the bay. He got out and walked to the railing, the sea breeze cool on his face. He was the chairman of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He was the visionary behind the city's most important new building. He had achieved a victory more total and more satisfying than he could have ever imagined. And he felt utterly, profoundly alone. The victory was not in their destruction, he realized. The vindication was not in their pain. It was in the simple, quiet affirmation of his own worth. The tragedy was that it had cost him his marriage to achieve it. Or perhaps the marriage had been the price of his silence, and that price had simply become too high. When he finally returned home late that night, the house was dark except for a single light in the living room. Clara was sitting in the wingback chair, his chair. The slate gray jacket was long gone. In its place was an aura of devastation. Her face was pale and tear-streaked, her eyes red-rimmed. She had a packed suitcase standing by her feet. "I'm going to a hotel," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I can't stay here tonight." "Clara," he began, but he didn't know what to say. "Was it worth it?" she asked, her voice trembling with a quiet, furious anger. "Was your revenge worth my family? You didn't just defeat them, Julian. You annihilated them. You took everything from them." "They tried to take everything from me," he said softly. "They tried to take you from me. They tried to take my dignity. The only difference is that what they tried to take was not theirs to give. What I took from them, they believed it was their entire world." "It was!" she cried, the tears finally spilling over. "It was their legacy, their name. And it was my world too. You knew that. You knew what it would do to them. To me." "Yes," he admitted. "I did. But I had hoped. I had hoped you would choose me. Not my money or my power. Me. The man you married. The man who loved you. On that morning 3 months ago when they sat here and offered to buy me off, all you had to do was stand up and tell them to leave your husband and your home. If you had done that, none of this would have happened. I would have walked away from the Phoenix Project, from all of it, just to have that one moment of loyalty from you. But you didn't. You asked me to listen. You asked me to consider their offer. You sided with them. The truth of it hung between them, stark and undeniable. She flinched as if he had struck her. She had no defense because he was right. Her silence had been a choice. Her inaction had been an action. "I didn't know," she whispered, the last desperate defense of the complicit. "I know," he said, and the sadness in his voice was vast. "That's the entire problem. You didn't know. You never thought to know. You never believed there was more to me than what your family saw." She stood up, her movements stiff and pained. She picked up her suitcase. "My sister Amelia, she called me," Clara said. "She told me she warned you. She said you were a good man and that our family had become a poison. She chose you, a virtual stranger, over her own blood." "She chose integrity," Julian corrected gently. "It's a difficult choice. I don't envy her." Clara walked to the door, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She paused with her hand on the knob. "The man I fell in love with, he designed libraries. He built things for people. He wouldn't have been capable of such calculated destruction." "That man is still here," Julian said. "He is the same man. The difference is, now you see him. You all do." She opened the door and left without another word, closing it softly behind her. The click of the lock echoed the sound he had heard that first day, but this time it signaled not a beginning, but an end. He was alone in the beautiful house he had built, the victor in a war he had never wanted to fight. The fallout was swift and brutal. The next morning, the city's financial news outlets exploded with the story. "Caldwell Construction ousted from Phoenix Project in hostile boardroom showdown." The reports were vague on the details, but the message was clear. The Caldwells had been publicly and humiliatingly dethroned. Their company stock, already teetering from over-leveraged ventures, plummeted by 70% in the first hour of trading. Decades of empire building, undone in a morning. Julian, shielded by the corporate wall of Elysian Properties, remained an enigma. The press knew only that a new, powerful chairman named Croft had taken the helm. His identity as Ethelred remained a closely guarded secret, a strategic advantage he was not yet willing to relinquish. The focus of the story was not on his rise, but on the Caldwells' spectacular fall. Marcus went to ground. The iron-willed patriarch, who had once dominated every room he entered, now refused to take calls or answer his door. He became a recluse in his own soulless mansion, a king in a castle of his own making, now his prison. Leo predictably lashed out. He gave a disastrous interview to a financial blogger, a rambling, incoherent tirade in which he accused Elysian properties of corporate espionage and called Julian a vindictive nobody who got lucky. The interview only served to make him look pathetic and unhinged, accelerating his company's demise. Within a week, the Caldwell Construction Board, facing a tidal wave of creditor demands and shareholder lawsuits, forced both Marcus and Leo to resign. Clara, adrift in the wreckage, tried to be the dutiful daughter. She went to the family estate, but her father wouldn't see her. She tried to reason with Leo, but he blamed her, screaming that if she hadn't married that snake in the first place, none of this would have happened. The family she had sacrificed her own integrity to appease had turned on her the moment their power vanished. They had never loved her unconditionally. They had seen her as another asset, and now her value had crashed along with their stock. She found an unlikely and uncomfortable solace in her sister. Amelia had moved out of the family home and into a small apartment downtown. When Clara showed up at her door, lost and broken, Amelia let her in without judgment. "Why did you do it, Amelia?" Clara asked, sitting on a simple sofa that was a world away from the opulent furniture of her past. "Why did you betray them for him?" Amelia finished making tea and handed a mug to her sister. "I didn't betray them for him," she said softly. "I did it for me. I was tired of watching them be cruel. I was tired of being silent. Dad and Leo, they weren't just arrogant, Clara. They were unkind. They enjoyed diminishing people. It was their sport." She looked at her sister, her gaze clear and direct. "What they did to Julian wasn't about you. It was about their own egos. He was just the latest target. And you let them. You stood by and watched them sharpen their knives, and you held him down. I warned him because it was the right thing to do. It's that simple." The simple, unadorned truth of Amelia's words was more painful for Clara than Leo's rage or her father's silence. Amelia had seen the moral equation clearly, while Clara had been blinded by fear and familial obligation. Julian, meanwhile, threw himself into his work. The demolition of the Caldwell Empire had been a necessary, if unpleasant, piece of business. Now he could focus on what truly mattered: building. The Phoenix Project moved forward with incredible speed and efficiency under his direct leadership. He was a demanding chairman, but a fair one. He listened to his team. He empowered his experts. He fostered a culture of collaboration and mutual respect, the exact opposite of the fear-based hierarchy Marcus had cultivated. He sold the house he had once shared with Clara. As beautiful as it was tainted by too many painful memories. The proceeds were quietly funneled into a trust he set up in Clara's name, administered by a third party. It was not a grand gesture of reconciliation, but a quiet act of responsibility. He had taken away her world. He would ensure she had the means to build a new one, should she choose to. He moved into a minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking the construction site of his tower, his new home a perch from which to watch his vision rise from the ground. He and Clara communicated only through their lawyers as the divorce was finalized. It was a clean, swift process. He asked for nothing. He gave her everything she was entitled to, and more. He felt a profound sense of release when it was over, but it was tinged with the melancholy of a closed chapter. He had loved her, and he would always mourn the woman he thought she was, the woman she might have been if she hadn't been a Caldwell. One evening, months later, He was working late in his new office, the one that had once been Aethelred's secret lair. He was reviewing the final lighting schematics for the tower's spire when his assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Croft, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a woman here to see you. A Ms. Amelia Caldwell. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Julian was surprised. He hadn't spoken to Amelia since their brief text exchange. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Send her in." Amelia entered the office, looking around with a sense of awe at the panoramic views and the high-tech displays. She was dressed simply, professionally. She looked more confident, more self-possessed than he had ever seen her. "Julian," she said, "I hope this isn't an intrusion." "Not at all, Amelia. Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I came to thank you," she said, her voice steady, "and to apologize." "Apologize for what? You helped me." "I apologize for all the years I stayed silent," she clarified. "For all the dinners where I sat and listened and did nothing. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." She then looked at him, a wry smile on her face. "And I wanted to thank you, not for what you did to my father and brother, they earned that, but for showing me that it was possible to stand up to them. In a strange way, you liberated all of us." She told him that their father's health was failing, a decline brought on more by his shattered ego than any physical ailment. Leo was facing legal troubles, having tried to hide assets from creditors. But Clara, she said, was changing. She had refused the trust fund Julian had set up. She had gotten a job managing a small art gallery, the kind of place her father would have scoffed at. She was living in a small apartment, the one Amelia had found for her. She was, for the first time in her life, entirely on her own. "She's finally becoming the woman you thought she was," Amelia said quietly. "It just took losing everything for her to find herself." The news settled in Julian's chest, a complex mixture of pride and sorrow. He was proud of her for finding her own strength, but saddened that he couldn't be there to witness it, to share it with her. Their story was over, but hers, it seemed, was just beginning. A year passed. The Phoenix Project, now officially named the Ethelred Tower, was nearing completion. It was a marvel, a soaring testament to sustainable design that had already won international acclaim. Julian Croft was no longer a secret. He was now one of the most respected figures in architecture and development, a man known as much for his integrity as for his vision. He had finally, fully, become himself. He was at a public gala celebrating the tower's imminent opening. It was held in the grand atrium, a soaring, light-filled space with living walls covered in lush greenery. He was surrounded by city officials, investors, and fellow architects, all offering their congratulations. He smiled. He shook hands. He was gracious and articulate, but a part of him felt detached, an observer at his own triumph. Across the crowded room, he saw her. It was Clara. He almost didn't recognize her at first. The designer gown and flawless coif were gone. She wore a simple, elegant, dark blue dress. Her hair was styled more naturally. She looked thinner, perhaps, but stronger. The look of a hunted animal that had haunted her features was gone, replaced by a quiet, self-possessed calm. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking up, at the way the light filtered through the massive skylights he had designed, a genuine, unforced smile of appreciation on her face. He excused himself from the group he was with and began to make his way toward her, his heart beating a little faster than he would have liked. He wasn't sure what he would say. He just knew he had to speak to her. She must have sensed him approaching because she turned just as he was a few feet away. Her smile faded, replaced by an expression of surprise, and then something else, something he couldn't quite read. "Julian," she said, her voice quiet amidst the noise of the party. "Clara," he replied, "you look well." "So do you," she said, her eyes sweeping around the magnificent atrium. "This is breathtaking. It's everything you ever talked about, beauty and function, a space that feels alive." "Thank you," he said. It was strange. They were talking like polite acquaintances, but beneath the surface, 1,000 unspoken things churned. "Amelia told me you were managing a gallery." She nodded, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "The Coleman Gallery. It's small, but we have some wonderful emerging artists. It's the kind of work you would like." There was no bitterness in her voice, only a simple statement of fact. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the gala swirling around them, creating a strange bubble of intimacy. "I never touched the money, you know," she said suddenly. "The trust fund. I couldn't." "I know," he said. "Amelia told me." "I needed to do it on my own," she explained, more to herself than to him. "I had to know that I could exist without the Caldwell name, without their money, without you. I had to build something of my own, even if it was small." He looked at her, and for the first time in a very long time, he saw the woman he had first met at that museum gala all those years ago. The one who had been drawn to the meaning behind the lines, not the prestige. "I'm proud of you, Clara," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but she didn't try to hide it. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "I came here tonight to see the building," she said, "but also, I came here to apologize. Properly. Not out of fear or guilt, but because I finally understand." She took a deep breath. "I was a coward, Julian. I loved you, but I was weak. I was so afraid of losing the world I knew that I was willing to sacrifice you to keep it. And in the end, I lost both. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you. I'm sorry for failing you, for failing us." Her apology was a gift. It was freely given, with no expectation of anything in return. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the one that allowed the past to finally settle into its proper place. He reached out and for a moment rested his hand on her arm, a simple, human touch. "I forgive you, Clara," he said, "and I am sorry too, for the collateral damage, for the way it all ended." "Don't be," she said, a sad, wise smile on her lips. "It had to end that way. It was a demolition. You were just clearing the site so something new could be built. For both of us." She was right. The reversal of fortune had not just been his, it had been hers too. He had lost a wife but regained his self-respect. She had lost an empire but had found her own soul. From the podium at the far end of the atrium, someone called his name. It was time for him to give his speech. "I have to go," he said reluctantly. "I know," she replied. "Go on, it's your moment. You earned it." She gave him a final, genuine smile, turned and began to walk away, melting back into the crowd. He watched her go, a sense of peace settling over him. Their story wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't a romance. It was a redemption narrative. For both of them. He walked toward the stage, toward the bright lights and the applause, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The past was forgiven. The future was unwritten. And for the first time, that felt not like a burden, but like a beautiful, open space, waiting for a new design. And so, we come to the end of Julian and Clara's story. It's a powerful reminder that true worth isn't about status or wealth, but about integrity, patience, and the courage to be who you are, even when the world tells you you're not enough. It also shows us that sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to find a solid foundation to build a new life upon. I have a question for all of you. Do you think Julian and Clara could ever find their way back to each other? Or was the damage too great and their new paths destined to remain separate? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll be reading through them all. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you found value in this story and want to see more like it, please give this video a like and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It truly helps more than you know. Until next time, remember to be kind, be patient, and never, ever let anyone else define your worth.